Sean Finnegan, and you are listening to Restitutio, a podcast that seeks to recover authentic Christianity and live it out today. Today, we're delving into a topic rife with controversy, polarization, and intense emotion. We're asking the question, how should Bible-based Christians respond to the Black Lives Matter movement? No doubt some of you will answer that we should all be out marching in full support, while others think BLM is itself racist and should be resisted. Of course, between these two extremes are many more options for responding to this issue of racism and police brutality. In order to navigate our way through these choppy seas, I've invited on Russell Brown, who offers an interesting perspective since he finds himself at the intersection of all three camps. Here now is podcast 358, A Christian Perspective on Black Lives Matter with Russell Brown. Russell Brown, welcome back to Restitutio. So glad to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to change gears and talk about another subject of great concern to many people, Black Lives Matter and this movement. In light of the whole subject of race, can you just let people know where you're coming from? What is your experience with race, and specifically, what was it like growing up?
If I said I had to identify myself as one race, I probably wouldn't be able to give you a straight answer. My dad is black. He's grew up in Georgia. My mom is Irish. So I guess that would make me, I've heard a bunch of different things. I guess it would make me mixed race, biracial. Growing up, my dad being black, my mom being white, I guess I really didn't see. And then the different areas that we lived in. I grew up in Providence for the first part of my childhood, leading up to I was, I believe, 10. And it was
Providence, Rhode Island.
Providence, Rhode Island. Yes. It's more of a diverse area in Providence. Then we moved to a town called West Warwick, and in West Warwick, it was predominantly white. I think even all the way through high school, there were other minorities there, but I think even in my graduating class, I was the only black one in my graduating class. But again, I never really looked at it. I think growing up, my dad's never really carried himself in a way where race was an issue. My dad's personality he has a very bold personality, outgoing. And so when we were in areas, and I was trying to think of, all right, was there ever a time where I remember my dad being treated a certain way because of his color? And I really can't think of one. And I think a lot of it is because my dad carries himself in a way where it's just not in his head at all. And so if he shows up to somewhere and someone maybe even wants to adjust the situation based off of his race, he is just very, I don't know what the word would be, but just very outgoing. Like he just jumps right into whatever the situation is, and it's a non-issue for him, and almost doesn't really give you an opportunity to do it. I asked my mom, I was asking her, hey, do you know any stories of just, before I was born, or just that you remember? And she said there were times where before I was born, when her and my dad were there, before me and my sisters were born, that she remembers getting pulled over or having to walk home like a really long way when they got pulled over on a motorcycle once. And she believes that race was an issue with that. But although there wasn't any racial slurs that were thrown at my dad or anything. So again, growing up, I think us growing up in a Christian family, race wasn't really something that was put out there. I never felt like I wasn't really accepted because of my race. Now, again, my skin color, if you looked at me in the wintertime, I'm probably a little more pale and white, and in the summertime I'm a little more dark. So I bet some people, a lot of times people look at me like, hey, what race are you, or what's your ethnicity, this and the other, because it's a little uncertain. I guess I'm not extremely dark skinned, and I'm not extremely light skinned.
That's really different than I think what we're really hearing, sort of like the majority view in America is that Black folks and maybe biracial people have a lot of negative experiences, not just growing up. I mean, because this incident with your mom would have been back in probably, the 70s?
70s, yeah.
Yeah, and you're saying you're not even really sure if that was legitimately racist or not. Did she say it was racist?
She felt that because of my dad's skin color, that the way that they were treated, she felt in that circumstance. Yeah. And so she
Okay.
has other
All right.
stories, but that was one of
Yeah.
the ones that she told me. Yeah.
So then she would have some stories about being being a white person married to a black person, having some issues over the years, and but you're saying that with your experience growing up in Rhode Island in the '90s, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
'80s,
Yep.
'90s,
90s,
mostly
80s,
'90s,
90s,
right? That'd be
mostly
your
90s.
your school years. What year you graduated from high school? Was it in the '90s?
99,
99,
99. Yep.
right? Yeah. So, really looking at that time period there, that decade in the part of Rhode Island you were in, you're saying that there wasn't much race stuff that you had to face.
No, no. Like I said, I can't even
Okay.
remember any experiences that where I had to face some kind of racism. Kind of just went through the schooling years, played sports, did everything, was around people, and never felt like I had like any straight, blatant, racism directed towards me.
Right. Right. Growing up, did your dad or your mom ever talk to you about the police being harder on black folks, or that you had to be extra careful?
No, no. And again, my mom, great, God centered, woman who doesn't think of those issues. She thinks she's looking to raise us to be, to love God, and so like those issues of race or anything like that really never came up. And again, like if there was any situations, no. But and then with police, I wasn't really somebody who got in trouble a lot or who had to deal with police. My interactions with police were kind of minimal. I remember my brother, who is 100% all white. He did have some interactions with police, and some of them weren't the greatest. Just hearing from my mom or hearing certain instances where police weren't the best towards my brother kind of shaped my view a little bit of police growing up. But me personally, outside of being the victim of a stolen bike or something else where I had to briefly talk to police, I really didn't have much interaction with them.
Okay. So what would you say was your reason for becoming a police officer later on? Obviously you just said you didn't really have a positive view of them. What changed, and how did you end up becoming a police officer?
Bad Boys 1, the movie Bad Boys 1. No, I think right, you see this movie, you see these guys who are actually like, I was into the hip hop genre of music. I think probably if I say like how did you carry yourself, like the stuff that I was into, my friends were majority white. I think growing up, the boxing scene when I boxed growing up, they were a lot more diverse, and that the music I listened to was a lot more diverse. But then, so I'm in that culture that listening to hip hop music, into sports, into that stuff. And then when I remember seeing like Bad Boys, or you'd see like certain TV shows about how policing was. I'm sure that shaped some of it. Like, oh, here's actually police officers that are cool and like doing stuff. My dad was also in law enforcement through the military, and so that shaped some of it too. I never had this moment where I was like, oh man, like this is what I die for. I gotta be a police officer, because I think even the music that I listened to was very anti-police as far as like hip hop music. Not like they weren't like blatantly coming at them, but like it was just wasn't supportive of police. So it's weird because the stuff that I was listening to wasn't pro policing, whatever. But I think I always had it in my head that I wanted to do something with law enforcement. Yeah, there was definitely a point where I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do policing. They threw out the recruitment thing for the city of Warwick, and
Uh-huh.
I knew where I wanted to go was somewhere federally. And so, but I know you have to work your way up. And so I'm like, oh, listen, I was in security at the time, working security. They threw out the posting for the recruitment. I remember my security boss at that time was a retired state police officer, and so I was like, I'm gonna try out for this. I know the city of Warwick was a good city to work in, and I put my name out there. I went through all the testing, and I ended up getting in like the top 11 or something like that for the recruitment drive. So yeah, then everything went pretty quickly, like getting into to law enforcement. I guess obviously, the obvious answer as I started, because this is right around the time that I started doing the recruitment drive for policing, was definitely around the time that God was really secure in my heart for him. And so the prospect of getting this position, obviously having a heart to want to help other people and get in the community, and dealing with people. I didn't know it was going to be at the level that it was at, but it's like, all right, this is policing. This is what just something that you can go out and serve the community and help them. I probably wasn't thinking of the other side of it, of the, oh wow, I'm going to carry a firearm and you're also going to be having instances where you're going to have to confront criminals and this, that, and the other. I wasn't the person who was like, oh, I want to join this because I want to go catch the bad guys. It was probably more of, at that time with my heart, is, hey, I want to serve people and help people out.
I see. So how long have you been a police officer?
So I just started my 14th year in policing. Yeah.
Okay.
Just finished up 13.
And you've done the majority of that on third shift, right?
Yeah, I did 8.5 years on third shift. And then I moved to day shift in patrol and did maybe about 2.5 years on there, maybe 3 years in there. And then I moved into a position as a school resource officer inside of one of the high schools.
And how long have you been doing that?
So last year was my first year doing that. I did one full school year as a school resource officer.
And then COVID came and everything got weird.
Then COVID came and yep.
Yeah, I got you. So let's talk about the perspective that you have on Black Lives Matter, since you are black and white and blue. You can see this from a unique point of view that many of the rest of us can't, who are only seeing it from one perspective.
Yeah, I would probably start from the police perspective, just as I'm seeing theirs on a daily basis, or just like through experience. When I think of police and their job and just how they're trained initially, police officers are trained initially to obviously stop the threat or restore peace in a certain situation. And a lot of times when we think of these extreme natures, it's stopping the threat. If there's a threat somewhere, officers are trained, listen, stop the threat so that way you don't get hurt, nobody else gets hurt, and you can bring some peace to the situation. I think a lot of times when you have that mentality, if I think of the training academy, you're using whatever force is possible to stop the threat. I think when police come into a situation, a lot of it, whether the person's black, white, whatever, a lot of the emotion, and we'll see this probably with all the groups, but a lot of the emotion that's first coming to them is fear. Like, so, you just take a typical traffic stop. You pull a vehicle over. Especially this is probably more at night too, when you're not really sure what you're really getting into. But you pull a vehicle over, there's always this unknown, regardless of who it is. Now, maybe if you can see who the person is, and it's this elderly, woman that you're pulling over, you probably might not have as much fear. But a lot of times, you don't even know the race of the person. Sometimes when you're pulling them over, you pull them over because you see an infraction, you pull them over because something doesn't look right or they committed some kind of violation. So when you pull them over, the automatic emotion that comes to a police officer is fear. Or when they have interaction with anybody, you get called to a domestic disturbance. You're going there and your emotions, your adrenaline's up, your fear is up. And so obviously the longer you do the profession, the better maybe you'll be able to manage the fear and not have that tunnel vision. But it still comes. It's just a natural defense kind of thing for people. So police officers there, they have this fear, they pull somebody over and they resort to their training, or they have interaction with someone, they resort to their training. So I think with this animated or this uptick in fear, if something looks like it's going to be a threat to them or to somebody else, they react off of that. Now we bring into someone who's black in race. I'm sure a lot of times with police officers, even they may have this thought in their head of, and in my city, obviously, we're not a very culturally diverse city. And so when you're dealing with people, majority of the white population, then you see somebody of minority, in their head, they're even thinking, oh, listen, this looks like the person who fits the profile of the person in the neighboring city, and they're a minority. And so their fear automatically goes up. So they're doing whatever they need to do to restore the situation. But a lot of times it's just based off of fear. I think when I first spoke with you, you had that the Jacob Blake situation that had happen. And so here, police they're called to a domestic incident, and there was just so many facts that just like weren't didn't really come out at first, and some came out, and there's still some ambiguity with a lot of stuff. But the call comes in that Blake is there. He wasn't supposed to be there. There was might have been some kind of like a restraining order. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had taken female's keys, and so police are getting all this information as they're going. Then I believe police were told that Blake potentially had a warrant too. And so as you're hearing these things, as you're going into the situation, your fear is amping up. Somebody with a warrant probably isn't going to be 100% compliant, or they're going to know that they're wanted. And so they're going to probably do whatever they can to avoid that. It's a domestic situation going on. Maybe who knows how the reporting party who called up, what their emotions were like too. And so if they're calling up and they're in panic mode, and so police are coming into the situation with their emotions high, and the average person, and definitely the average police officer, they're going in there already with this sense of, and it's probably to a fault, but they're going in there already with this sense of, I need to go in there and I need to bring peace to the situation, hold this person accountable. This person has a warrant, so I'm going to have to arrest them. Who knows what that's going to look like? Are they going to fight against me like that person did 3 months ago? You have all these, you're thinking worst case scenario from the top down. And so is that the right way to handle it? From a safety point of view, maybe you want to assume the worst could happen and you want to be prepared for the worst to happen. But a lot of times that causes police to maybe not handle the situation the best. So from an experience type of thing, I've come into these scenarios and I found that it has been helpful when you come into them to show up, and as you're trying to diffuse the situation, not automatically. I was listening to, he's a Christian hip hop artist named KB. He says that every time he deals with the police, he always feels like he's starting at guilty and having to work his way out of that.
I see.
Yeah, the Jacob Blake situation, obviously, he probably knew he had the warrant. He probably knew what he had done, whatever the situation he was violating, maybe a restraining order or shouldn't have been on a promise. So he already knew he was guilty. But even if I'm going into a situation where I know the person is guilty, the automatic thing is to not paint the picture or zone in on that, to see the person as, hey, listen, you're a human being. We're here to try to sort things out, to try to figure it out, to try to bring peace to the situation. What's going on? I'm not talking to you as like you're already under arrest, you're a little kid, or here I am, the higher up authority, and I'm looking down on you. Now, does that work every single time? No. But when you go into a situation valuing the other human being and not looking at them as like, hey, this is a criminal automatically, a lot of times that helps with the other person's fear. That rolls into the Black Lives Matter perspective. Now you have a black person, what's their emotion? A lot of times they're having the same emotion, fear. You think of KB saying that I'm starting at guilty and having to work my way out of it. He was talking about how he got pulled over. He had two officers come up to his car. Both of them, they have their hand on their weapon already. Just on there as their weapons holstered, but they have their hand, resting on it. They're not. That might just be a natural reaction to them, or they may be thinking fear. I'm going up to this car. I got to expect the worst. I'm gonna have my hand on my weapon just in case.
Is that standard protocol to have your hand on your weapon?
No, it's not. But when the training aspect of stuff is some of it's just like a resting thing. I was talking about this with another officer where he's like, why do we always put our hands like on our belt? It's just like a natural, like you rest your hand on your belt. And so we're thinking, all right, this is maybe just like a comfort thing, or it's an, awkward. I'm in a moment right now where just things are awkward. And so you put your hands on your belt. And so like your gun is on your belt, but so it's like it's a resting area, but you're also trained nonstop to be like ready to draw at any point. So when you get trained over and over and over again, and now you're nervous about a situation, you're not thinking, all right, I'm going to this situation, I'm going to have to use my weapon. But you are thinking all these training experiences that have led you to have to shoot and not have to pull out the pepper spray or you've never, we rarely have training situations where you go there and it's like, all right, we're just gonna, diffuse the situation verbally. It's always, we're training you for the worst possible thing.
Let me pause you on that for a second. And before we get into the black perspective on the encounter, let's just dwell on this police side for a moment. You mentioned training a couple times here, and that seems to make a lot of sense to me. A while back, I read this Malcolm Gladwell book, which was oddly relevant, looking forward to many more incidents of inexplicable police brutality or police killing, a guy with a cell phone or a candy bar or somebody that seems like they're not a threat. And in his book, Blink, he talked about the training a little bit and about how basically you, in the moment, need to make a snap judgment. And the training is the judgment to make is always preserving your own life at any cost, I guess. Now, so my question to you is, is that something you see as just a necessity of a policing force, or is that something that could be improved upon so that the police aren't so amped up and so ready to kill and then ask questions later?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I would see it as something that could be improved upon, but someone else could come in here and be like, hey, listen, you go into, thinking of a training where they'll have us go into a shoe house. You have two, posters, one person's holding a gun, the other person's holding, like you said, a cell phone. And like, you have to make this really, split second decision to stop the threat. How do you train in a way where that scenario happens and you go there and, do you take that? Is it just the extra second? But then that extra second could cost you your life. And so they're probably from that side are thinking, hey, listen, we need to get this person trained. So that way, even a split second isn't wasted and their life is lost. When they're training for you to protect yourself and obviously to protect other people around there. And so I don't know, what that looks like, because in my head, and maybe even some of the other officers in my department, they may go into that situation and they're a lot more, all right, I'm going to slow myself down so that way when I see this or when I see this other person again, I want to value them as a human being, assess the situation for that extra split second, and then take action. But the way that we're trained, and again, this could be rightfully so, but the way they were trained is you go in there, you see something, you stop the threat. And so there's times when you run into the shoot house, and I'm probably even guilty of this, where you run into this practice scenario shoot house and you end up shooting the person with the cell phone because you see something in that split second tunnel vision. And they want you to practice this over and over and over again. So that way you can go into the shoot house and identify it quickly, because they'll call you back in and be like, hey, listen, this person, they had a cell phone. It wasn't, you need to take that extra, so it's not saying they're going in there, but at the same time, a split second could cost. So I think there's room for improvement. I think there's ways of even, not every situation, again, and I'm speaking for my city, not every situation is a life or death moment either, but it's just a matter of maybe training in a way that you're taking on all the scenarios, all the possible outcomes. What are different ways that can you move to cover and then maybe address it? Can you take that extra second? Can you maybe where it takes somebody 3 seconds to realize that the person has a cell phone, can we cut that down to 1 second? Where you go in there and now you evaluate it. Now you make your decision based off of that. And the person with the cell phone is able to go home that day, cutting down the time, but still not having that tunnel vision. I think that's probably why they do it over and over again too, is to get you to be in a scenario where you can train and evaluate with the tunnel vision going on and slow things down a little bit. So yeah, I think there's room for improvement. I just don't know what that looks like.
Well, would you agree that there is a problem here on the police side? I mean, I know you're a police officer, so you're going to kind of default to defending that point of view because that's the point of view you're coming from. But do you see these different incidents, George Floyd, the many others before in the last wave of Black Lives Matter, as well as the current one? Do you see these as isolated incidents that are, explainable as bad apples within the force, or do you see them as something systemic that needs to be confronted and changed? I mean, how do you think of it as an insider here?
Yeah. Training wise, could stuff be improved? Yeah, there's always areas for improvement. Can there be more training so now people can go and evaluate these situations at a slower speed? And again, it's tough because I'm coming into a situation as a Christian. And so now maybe my perspective is coming in there and again, esteeming the other person as greater than myself. And so I'm going to automatically probably take that extra couple seconds or do whatever it takes to make sure that I'm treating them the right way. In the Floyd incident, I look at that and, as I watched that video, anger comes in me towards that officer who is, again, stuff had happened before. They wrestle with the guy, they do whatever is going on, but then it hits a certain point where something has to click in your head where you're like, this is another human being, and I need to treat them as such. And that wasn't the case with the Floyd one. As you watch this officer, kneel on Floyd's neck for such an extended amount of time, and it was unneeded. I think of the Jacob Blake situation too, where like I watched that, and again, I didn't even know what had happened before that whole incident occurred, and now it comes out that they might have wrestled with the officer. He was actually tased. He had a knife in his hand. There's certain things that come up, and whether or not all that was true, something definitely happened before the video that we watched. But there was still a side of me that thinks in my head, hey, listen, officers, we're trained to bring peace to the situation. Like, so as me, I'm watching the officers, like, why would you even put him in a scenario that he can get around to his car? Like, we're trained in that way, and so maybe they weren't trained enough. And again, you tussle with the guy, you tase him, and maybe you're just not in the right situation to think that clearly. But you want to have control over the people that are there in the situation for safety reasons. And it seemed like in that scenario, and again, we can always Monday morning quarterback it without knowing the full, the full spectrum of what went on. But more training is needed. And then,
would you say that there are a number of police officers in every precinct that are bullies, that are just like in it for the sake of power, or short-tempered, or prone to excessive violence or whatever? Would you say that that's the case typically across America, or in your own experience, or is that kind of a misconception that people have?
Yeah. I remember speaking with you. You had asked me, do our police racist as a whole? And the answer is absolutely no. And again, that's coming from, I don't know every single police department or every single officer, but just seeing the officers that I come in contact with, and police officers as a whole aren't racist. Police officers as a whole aren't really even overly aggressive and domineering, in a situation. But there are, if I'm just thinking about my police department, there are officers who maybe, again, in the heat of the emotion, maybe act out too much, maybe in the heat of there's obviously this pride situation. Even I could be guilty of this in certain situations where you're dealing with somebody, and for the fourth or fifth time, and here you are, you're talking to them, and maybe you're looking down on them because it's like, we're back at your house again for dealing with this, and this, or, you're breaking into cars again. And so now you have this, I'm superior to you, and maybe looking down on them type of mentality. And whenever you have that, I think there's room for, if that person tries to buck against your pride, or if they're not respecting you in the right way, officers react in a certain way. And so I think there are some officers who are maybe over aggressive in the way that they handle stuff. And you probably have that in every department. I think, again, my department, it's a good one. And I'm not, like paying it out. I'm just say, have I been in situations where I was with another officer and I believe they acted maybe over aggressive than they could have in that situation? I would say yes. But it's not, for the most part, the majority, it's not the case.
Well, this seems to be one of the things that the Black Lives Matter movement can confront, is, where police officers can self-police their own officers that they know either shouldn't be police officers because they just can't handle the intensity that you described earlier of going into a situation where it could be kill or be killed. It very well could be, and you have to be prepared for that. And let's face it, the way God made us, we're not made to be in those kinds of situations. That's an unnatural, difficult, confusing, and error-prone kind of environment to be in for anybody. And so, maybe police stations can sort of wash these people out, these bad apples, because, that guy that was on George Floyd's neck, those other guys just stood there. And other people in the station, they probably knew this guy was prone to excessive violence, or once his adrenaline's up, he doesn't calm down, or however you want to say it. Like, this was probably not the first incident for that police officer. And so do you think that there's a possibility that because of sensitivity to police brutality, that police stations are going to like self police on this issue?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And speaking for my own department, would I say it's an issue here? I would say not at all. Just because I'm thinking of incidences that have come up, it's not the case really in our department. Not to say that this something shouldn't be something that's addressed because it could come up at some point or whatever. But yeah, with those, especially, this should be definitely a time where police departments look and say, hey, listen, these incidents here, right or wrong in the position that the police officers are in, could they have been handled in a way where stuff didn't blow back up against, you have some police departments where after the incident happened, it's just an automatic, all right, we're firing that officer. And maybe they saw grounds because they didn't follow policy or they were acting excessive, whatever the case may be. But I think that's an eye-opening thing for police departments to be like, okay, we need to look at this and we need to address it. And that's just mankind too. Like mankind automatically, like you get cut off and disrespected on the road, you flip out. And so now put that same person again, without not being a Christian, not filled with the Holy Spirit, out on the street and have them respond to multiple calls where people are going to be disrespectful to you. At some point, you're going to like your pride and you're going to feel like you're getting attacked in a certain way. And so now you want to have police officers there, Christian or not, that are trained in a way that they don't fly off the cuff and flip out.
Would you say this is more of a masculine issue, that female police officers are less prone? I mean, you don't really see women officers getting singled out in these various incidents in the news, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because majority of police officers or majority of police departments are male, and so I know there's just, even as female officers coming into our department, I know that some of the veteran female officers will tell them, hey, listen, you need to amp it up even more, because they're going to look at you as a female, and they're going to try to maybe test the waters a little more or look down on you a little more.
So maybe they're more aggressive.
Yeah, maybe not more aggressive, but just more prone to express their authority and to let them know, hey, listen, I'm a police officer and I'm not going to take any garbage from you. So, but again, all female officers that I've dealt with, they have the opposite end, where you can see certain qualities about them where they're a little more compassionate towards a situation, or maybe a little more patient, and so that's just qualities that God has instilled women with. So
let's move on to the Black perspective of Black Lives Matter. We looked at the police perspective. Let's look at the perspective from African Americans in the United States in particular, and how they're perceiving the situation. You mentioned that there's a default sense of, I guess, fear and injustice, like you're being targeted. Would you like to say more about that?
Yeah. Again, the fear aspect is there. Maybe they feel they're targeted. I mean, just from America as a whole. And again, it's tough for me to wrap my head around this, because again, I didn't grow up, really at any point feeling, hey, wow, it could have been there, but I didn't feel it, or I didn't see it, or I was too ignorant to it to be like, hey, listen, this person is putting me to the side because I'm a minority. Or I didn't see it with my dad, where I'm like, oh, wow, he's really, and again, I could have just been ignorant to it or whatever. But, we're 60 years removed from Blacks not having the same privileges as white, and so there's still maybe there's still there's remnants from it, or just that systemic of here they were oppressed 6 years ago, and they're still feel like they're trying to get on their feet, and so if any area or if any situation just appears that it looks like it's preventing them from getting on their feet, they could feel oppressed. They could feel like they're being, to a certain extent, marginalized, or from the police perspective, I could see that too. And so many things come from that too. It's like, the culture. I grew up listening to rap music, and the majority of rappers that I listened to were Black. And so, and a lot of rap and the rap culture was, what were they endorsing? They were endorsing gangs and violence and different stuff like that. And so when you have that stigma coming out of that culture, and that's what people are seeing all the time, then they automatically, you're either, if you're Black, you're either, an athlete or a rapper. I feel like that was the thing, stigma growing up. And so you see somebody and you automatically think, hey, this could be that person that I saw on the 6 o'clock news last night that is wanted out of this. Here they are there. And so, with that mentality, now you have Black people, they're getting painted into this certain group or this certain, hey, this person here looks like either a rapper or a criminal or the person I saw on the news last night or whatever I'm seeing on TV being thrown at me. And you automatically paint them as that picture before you even get to know them. Black people could feel, what are you doing? Why are you painting me in that picture? That's not who I am. Why, when you pull me over, you're automatically assuming that I'm the bad guy here, that I'm guilty, or when you have interaction with me. I feel like it's still there. Like that feeling is still there. I can't, and that's somebody who, again, did not see it with my dad's life at all growing up. And so is there opportunity for someone to come and live their life and maybe and be Black in a majority white culture and maybe not ever feel like you're painted or there's something racist going on? Yeah, I could look at my dad and I could say that's absolutely the case. And he worked his way and maybe just put blinders on to anything if it was thrown his way and just lived his life. But it still exists. Maybe they just didn't see it in his life, or maybe we just didn't see it in the culture that we're in. But I think there is that certain thing there. And if it's not as big as they're portraying it to be, Blacks still feel that way. And so for them, that's what they're feeling. That's what Black people feel. They feel like the oppression's still there. They feel like they still can't get on their feet in one way or the other. The socioeconomic part of it too. My dad and I had a boxing gym in Providence. And so a lot of the minorities, they weren't wealthy, whether or not this stems from what had gone on, from 60 years ago, and they're just trying to get on their feet. And here they are, they're in this certain area, this certain culture. They don't have a lot of money. And so when you don't have a lot of money and maybe you have a single parent household, or even if you have both parents there, but they're both working because they're trying to make ends meet because they don't have enough money to pay for this and the other. A lot of the kids that would come to this community center were kids that were like, hey, we don't have anything else going on. So they would either go out and join other kids and do crime, or they would have this community center to come to and actually, some of them just looking for like a parental figure, just looking for something to do to stay out of trouble. And, a lot of that just stemmed from being in a household where both parents weren't 100% present, or one parent wasn't always there. And so they didn't have that parental maybe structure or the fatherly structure to show them the right way to go. And so minorities are kind of in that.
Okay. What about the All Lives Matter and the white perspective on the whole situation? I see a lot of people on social media that are very publicly taking strong positions against Black Lives Matter, saying it's some sort of anti-Christian or communist or anti-capitalist or whatever organization that's plotting to destroy America. Then you've got other white people that are super hardcore social justice warriors, go to every march, are willing to do, anything to help. So what would you say about the white perspective on this? Because you are also half white.
I am.
So go ahead.
Yeah, it's tough. And again, I probably wouldn't put myself on one side or the other side to be like, hey, listen, we should all go out there and, I wouldn't say I'm not saying I'm not here, and I don't, as far as the Black Lives Matter group as a whole, I don't put myself and be like, oh yeah, this is like, I'm in support of them. I could see All Lives Matter looking at them and be like, what do you mean? Like they're looking maybe even in their own community or whatever, and they're seeing, I don't have that feeling towards Black people, or I don't have that, what are you talking about? This isn't the case. Maybe and again, maybe not looking at the full issue, or maybe not looking at other areas outside of their own lives and be like, hey, listen, is this really a problem here? I think if you step back and you look at it, there is separation. There are people, minorities, that maybe they're not well off because of certain things that have happened in our country. And so anybody in the All Lives Matter group should be able to step back and maybe see that. I was thinking of like the Irish were like, and maybe it wasn't on the level of like, they definitely weren't like maybe slaves, but like, didn't they came over here in like 1845 and they were oppressed, right? Like there were certain,
basically everybody was, man. The Irish, the Italians, the Polish, everyone other than the ones who were conquering, like the Spanish came over and conquered South America and stuff, but and the British came over and kind of conquered some stuff. But yeah, most of these other groups, they were just given a really hard time, excluded from
Hmm.
prominent social institutions like big churches or big opportunities. And,
Hmm.
they just had to
Yeah.
work in the ghetto, and that's what they did.
Yeah. 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 I remember like growing up, like hearing about like Irish need not apply. Like they, if you want a job and you're Irish, don't come here to apply for it. Or they were seen as like dirty or this, that, and the other. And so now someone looks around and like, hey, listen, like I don't see the Irish oppressed anymore. Like they got worked their way out of it or whatever. I think it's different with black people because, it's not so easy to look at somebody and be like, it's easy to still look at somebody who is a minority and be like, all right, this is a person and I'm putting them automatically in the group like that. And so do we see successful black people and black people that were able to go to school, do what they need to do to get the job and to work hard? I think we do. I think we see those success stories. And so all lives matter could be looking at that and be like, no, see, all lives matter. And what are you talking about? Like, when I'm not racist, I don't see in my own life, I'm not oppressing blacks or I'm not looking down at them. Look at them. They have jobs, they're being successful. Black people are athletes and they make some of the most money in the world or whatever. But if you step back and look at it as a whole in the country, the question is, are people being marginalized? Are they because of their race? Are people looking down at them because of their race? Are people automatically painting them in a certain situation because of their race? All Lives Matter needs to step back and look at that and say, if that's true, me coming back and saying, no, it's not Black Lives Matter. You mean all lives matter? Hey, houses that, this one house is burning down and you go, the firefighters show up and be like, hey, listen, like, what do you mean this house matters? Like, all houses matter. Like, no, this house is actually burning down. Like, this house needs attention. Like, our minorities being oppressed. Is there a certain thing that's going on where blacks are being looked down upon or being oppressed because of their race? If that's a situation, then all lives matter as a response probably isn't being very sympathetic or compassionate towards it. And if it's a not issue, then I guess they have a point. But I don't think we can look at America and be like, it's a not issue, with all these things that are coming up.
Yeah. What would you say about your faith? How does it inform you to think about this situation? And, how do you approach Black Lives Matter differently than if you weren't a Christ follower?
Yeah, I think first is just having a kingdom perspective. This is the big thing, the thing that's broken that is in the limelight right now because of man, because of sin, because of everything that's going on. This is the thing that's in the limelight right now, whether or not it's 100% accurate and it's an issue or it's being blown up or whatever it is. This is the thing that's broken right now. And so having a kingdom perspective, I think, is the first point of like, okay, listen, something's going on here. And this is another reason why we need and can't wait for Jesus to return and right all this stuff. So to not get 100% caught up in it and be like, this, we need to, things need to be, Christians, I feel like, need to be people that are spearheading fixing any kind of injustice. I think there's a John Mark McMillan song, but he says in the song, everybody's calling for a covenant, but nobody's drawing blood. And in my head, it reminded me of this situation because I was thinking like everybody's calling for justice, but nobody's willing to actually like put themselves out there to actually put in the work. And I feel like Christians should be those people. If we think, we can't look at our government and say like, hey, does our government represent the kingdom? Our government in America, I'll let people be the judge of that, whether or not. But we as Christians, we're part of a different government. We're part of this kingdom government. If we're in a position of freedom through Christ, we want to use that to help others gain their freedom through Christ. And I think the path to that, as I think of biblical justice, we're called to fight for the weak, the oppressed, the marginalized, those who can't fend for themselves. If there's a certain part of injustice, if this is real and true and there's a certain part of injustice, like, we as Christians should look at it, see if it's true, and then if there is, go in there and do what we can to help that, to fight for those who are weak and oppressed. Do we make that our end goal or our blown up objective to try to make this world here and now? Do we expect it to be the kingdom before Jesus comes back? No, not at all. But are we pushing and fighting to be kingdom representatives in whatever way that looks like? I say yes. And so what does that look like practically? Again, end goal is ultimately it's about the gospel. I think coming in there as Christians, if they can, obviously somebody's oppressed or getting them out of, restoring up a certain society. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Going into a certain neighborhood and being like, hey, listen, these schools are messed up or this is messed up, and building it up in hopes of, again, as we're doing these things, the end goal in my head is biblical justice of just leading them to, hey, listen, we care about you, we love you, we want to help out in whatever situation it is. As a Christian, even as a well-off Christian, we're able to come into a situation and help you out. And that may look financially of like helping them to see what it looks like to get a job, or guide them along the way to get, a better job, or guide them along the way to, get the college education that is needed. These certain steps are the path to obviously the end goal. And I think ultimately it's about the gospel. I think people need to hear about what God has done through Jesus, and this could be used as a great path to do it. You're going in there, you're seeing people that feel like they're oppressed. You're seeing people that are having a hard time or struggling to make ends meet or get on their feet. We as Christians should be the first ones to kind of step in and say, okay, listen, if this is the issue here, we're hearing you, we love you, what we want to help you. Here's what it looks like. The help looks like practically and getting hands on, but ultimately with the goal of pointing them to, hey, it's not all about this life here and now. There's a God who's going to send his son, and he's going to restore everything to the original paradise, and he wants you to be a part of that. So yeah. From the Christian perspective, again, I'm thinking love. I'm thinking you see injustice, you're going in there and you're trying to address that and try to use it as an opportunity. I don't know, we're in just like one of the greatest times, I think, even right now with like the pandemic, the racial stuff that's going on. We are in such a great time right now as Christians to just shine as a light and be salt, where there's so much garbage around and that people are seeing. We have such an opportunity to stand out. We do our part in whatever that looks like, and being led by the Holy Spirit and asking God what that looks like.
Yeah. I think, too, within the Bible, we have a lot of resources against racism, where we read how there's no Jew or Gentile or male or female, all are one in Christ Jesus, that these kinds of distinctions in Christ are of no value when it comes to how God sees us, when it comes to our equality before God, our salvation. And, even the outpouring of the Holy Spirit is on old men and young men and women and slaves and, whoever will call upon the name of the Lord. And, I really see within Christianity itself, the resources, or within the Bible itself, the resources, the intellectual resources to condemn very strongly any kind of racism, whether it's racism against black people or racism against white people or some other nationality or ethnicity. There's just no place for it when we're all in the same family of God. And, that's very clear, especially racism against Africans or African Americans just doesn't make any sense from a biblical point of view. Now, I know that Christians obviously had gotten this wrong, and there are probably many today still that are harboring racism in their hearts. And yet it was Africa that protected our Lord when he was a little child. It was Africa that saved and gave refuge to our Jesus. And it was an African who carried his cross when he couldn't do it anymore. And the very, very early on, we have the Ethiopian treasurer who's God sends Philip on a special mission just for this one man. He doesn't go down to Ethiopia. He meets him in the middle of nowhere on this road down to Gaza and preaches to him. And, so there's obviously a heart that God has, and that as Bible-believing people, we should all have for Africa.
Yeah.
And, for any country really or region, but to be racist against black people, it really doesn't make sense from a biblical worldview. Now, Christianity had gotten this wrong and endorsed the very greed-based practice of slavery, of racial slavery in this country, and that is to our shame. I mean, that is an absolute embarrassment. A black eye on the body of Christ. It's just it's just disgusting, and we do need to repent of that. I think America as a country has repented in its laws, at least, abolishing slavery, and then in the Jim Crow laws, getting rid of them. And there have been a lot of government programs to help out minorities, not just black people, but a number of different minorities in colleges. Yet the problem is still here. I mean, there is a disparity economically. I don't come to you with any great solution here, Russell. I think what you said, sharing the gospel with people. That's really kind of our. We might be a one-trick pony as Christians, but like that's our move. It's like, look, if I give you this gospel, it'll change your life, and now God enters in the equation. We're not just dealing with what you have on your own.
Yeah, Christians should spare that. If you think of the gospel, it's this pride versus humility type thing too. And it's not just, we want people need to hear the gospel, and we hope that they hear it and cling to it. And, that's going to do enormous things in their hearts and in their lives, but also, us just portraying that too, like looking like Jesus did. And so we're looking at people, when you just mentioned all the stuff with just racism, like it really is pride. It's people, you're taking yourself and you're seeing yourself as greater than somebody else, and you're looking down on somebody, and like that wasn't Jesus at all. Like he was, he had a heart of compassion because he was looking at these people as, he was loving them, he was looking at them as more than himself, it's just insane. It's not the natural way to go about things. And so then on an individual basis, like what is that if somebody was listening to this and they were going to go out to their day, having that same heart of looking at somebody as greater than themselves, and just, and that means having compassion for somebody, trying to understand where they're coming from, hearing the person out, seeing in what ways you can come into that situation and help them out. I had a minority who was at the Nickerson Community Center who, I met him 12 years later after I had trained him at this community center. He came there, we used to hang out, we used to listen to music together, I trained him with the boxing, and then I didn't see him again for 10 or 12 years. I remember he had come to a couple of the fellowships that we had in Providence on Academy Ave. I brought him there. Didn't see him again for 10 years. And then I'm working a football game, like a detail, and he's working at this school here. And he comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, man, I haven't seen you forever." He's like, "I just want to let you know how much you and your dad meant for me." He's like, "I lived in South Providence. I didn't have, our family like really didn't have much of anything." He's like, "I remember one time you just handed me one of your cell phones because you were going to go get a new one. And I didn't have a phone. You just gave me your cell phone." He's like, "The love that I received from you guys meant the world to me." And now he's working in a Christian school. His life is great. But so it doesn't compute in our heads, but like when we're out there being Jesus to people and just loving them, allowing God to work that in us, and to work those opportunities in us, like we can make a great impact for people in their lives, people who are oppressed, people who are, from any end of the spectrum. So it's living out that gospel.
Well, thanks for sharing that story. That's really, really powerful. And, that highlights the sort of focus, I think, that's really helpful for Christian activism. I'm not saying that any other form has no effect. I mean, obviously, Martin Luther King Jr. was able to do incredible things with public policy, activism targeted at public policy. But I think this individual approach is really something that is within the range of any one of us to get involved with. And, how did that whole domino set of circumstances begin? What was the first domino? Well, you and your dad went down to the city. I mean, your dad worked his tail off his whole life to get out of the inner city, to have a decent situation to raise you and your brother and your two sisters. And, but he went back and you went with him and you invested. And, if we're not doing that, we're not going to meet kids like this one you just described. So, maybe that's something where we need to just get off our butts, especially those of us who live in the burbs, in our bubbles of extremely low crime, and get into a program or get into some sort of volunteer situation that is needed. Maybe that's something that we need to step up in this time. I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else here. So.
We could all talk to ourselves on this issue. I think we could all do more, man.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the question should be, what are you doing, oh Christian? What are you doing to help the situation? To take this kid that you mentioned, the impact you had on this person probably wasn't the only thing that turned things around. But if you hadn't been involved, and instead this kid was out committing crimes during that same time that he was hanging out with you instead, as soon as you end up in the justice system and in the penal system, I mean, now it's way harder to get a job. Now your contacts are criminals, and what are you thinking about when you're on the inside? It's probably not, well, how do I straighten out my life? It's probably more like, well, how do I survive once I'm on the outside, and I don't have any skills, I don't have any education, so who can I hook up with to work for under the table or doing something that's not on the up and up? So. These things do have ripple effects. It would be great to see more Christian activism in this sense as well.
Yeah, man. It's funny you mentioned that. His best friend, I asked him how his friend was growing up, that he had a sidekick with him, and his best friend was arrested. I think he robbed a store or something like that. He's like, I went and saw him. He doesn't look the same anymore, but he was locked up. He went to the prison to go and see him. So you see two people, both minorities from the same kind of neighborhood, and one feels the love of Christ, the love of God in one area, and they get pulled in that direction, and the other one goes in the other. So we can play a big impact. So,
all right, well, that's all I've got. Did you want to say anything else?
No, that's it.
Our time is about out, but thanks so much for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to offer any comments or questions, you can come on to restitutio.org, find episode 358, A Christian Perspective on Black Lives Matter with Russell Brown, and leave your comment or question on there. I'm sure that there are plenty of other issues that we haven't even taken into consideration in this episode, so I would love to hear from those of you who are more educated on this subject. Also, check out the episode from last week where Russell Brown shares about his COVID-19 experience, which was really fascinating to hear a firsthand account of what he has been through and his family. Additionally, we got a new review. This is from Apple Podcasts user MYOJ71989, a real catchy name there, writes in, gave a 5-star rating, and writes in, just finished listening to the episode on bias in translations. Sean does a great job of presenting complex history and content in a clear and concise manner. Thank you so much, MYOJ71989, for that review on Apple Podcasts. Really does help to raise up Restitutio in the rankings so that it's easier to find and it gets recommended to people who listen to other podcasts that are similar. So thanks so much for that. If you haven't checked out the class on Bible translation and especially the issue of bias in translation, go ahead and check that out, starting with episode 330 and running all the way through 353 was the class on Bible translation. 24 episodes, about roughly a half an hour each on them. And that's also available on YouTube if you prefer a video format. The one probably referred to in this review was episode 347, which was called Bias in Bible Translation. And this is where we got into the committee effect, where a committee of translators basically selects out any translations that don't fit with the historical or traditional reading of a particular verse. And in this way, bias gets preserved generation after generation in English Bible translations just because that's the way we've always read it, or to change it would aggravate too many people. So to take a look at that episode 347 if you're interested in that topic. Thanks for that review. We'll see you next time. If you'd like to support this ministry, you can do that at restitutio.org. It's like the word restitution with no N.org. We'll see you next time, and remember, the truth has nothing to fear.